So once again, hello and welcome to the first Template EU Projects webinar on plurilingual telecollaboration. My name is Anita Cvetković-Kine, and I will be giving you an example of a virtual exchange project. Then my colleague, Professor Dr. Yulin Kudrim-Schmid, will talk about the plurilingual aspects. And finally, Hilal Shahin's presentation will focus on the cultural aspects of telecollaboration or virtual exchange projects. So let's start with the definition. One of the leading experts in this area, Robert O'Dowd, defines it as the engagement of groups of learners in online intercultural interactions and collaboration projects with partners from other cultural contexts or geographical locations as an integrated part of their educational programs. We highlighted a few of these words, a few of these aspects, and we will come back to them as the webinar progresses. The example that I want to share with you today is the Spanish-German telecollaboration project. In this virtual exchange, we have a Spanish class, which is located in a rural area. About 6 students of different ages and competences are in this class, and they have about 3 English lessons per week. The German class, on the other hand, is located in the countryside. There are 23 pupils of the same age, and they have about 7 hours of English, 7 lessons of English each week. Their topic, well, they wanted to share information about themselves, about their school, about their town, and finally join an online teleconference. So you can see this project has 4 stages. We have the teacher's introductory video, which is asynchronous with a worksheet. This is my school video exchange, again asynchronous with posters and worksheets. This is me, asynchronous exchange with Padlet, task cards, and worksheets. And finally, the live online teleconference, which is titled This Is Us. For the first stage, teachers' videos, here teachers created a short video introducing themselves and the project. In this video, they included information about themselves, their hobbies, their likes, their dislikes, and some information about their country or the area where they live, and some words in another language. They sent these videos to the other classroom, and then the other teacher and the pupils watched it and completed a worksheet. So here I have an example of a worksheet. So as you can see in this example, the students had to listen, watch, and then circle the correct words. Or another example here, they had to add some other details that for example, the final exercise that I understood, they could write them down. The second stage in this project was about creating a video about their school and their region, community, and sharing it with the other classroom. In order to do this, they first needed to prepare themselves. So first, they worked a little bit on vocabulary, grammar, ICT skills. So for example, they did a vocabulary revision of rooms in school. They used online dictionaries if they needed some words. And then they prepared a short text about their assigned room and practiced this. After that, they included some information about their town and culture, created the videos, and the teacher shared the videos with the other classroom. Here's an example. This is an example of a grammar revision. As you can see here, we have chunks in, I can see, and so on. Or for example, for vocabulary, this teacher used WordWall, which is an excellent resource available in different languages, where you can practice, in this case, a matching exercise for vocabulary. As I said, they also decided to add certain aspects, certain interesting facts about their town. So in this case, this is from a video where the Spanish school is presenting the so-called flag of pride, which consists of different colors, and they explain to the other classroom what each color means, for example. This was something extra they wanted to include. Once the videos have been sent to the other classroom, the pupils had to watch it and complete a worksheet. And then they also discussed what they saw, commented on similarities and differences. And there were some really interesting comments here as well. So, for example, in the German school, there is a farm, and the Spanish class, the Spanish pupils really, really enjoyed this aspect that there is a farm at the German school. Having done this, we have also the example of the comprehension worksheet. So as you can see, while they were watching the video, they had to match the objects with the correct rooms. So again, there is a certain activity that they did while watching. Or tick the boxes of the rooms that are mentioned. Stage 3, so-called This Is Me. Again, we have a preparation stage. Teachers created a virtual platform using task cards and Padlet. They wrote a text that served as a model for the pupils. The pupils then prepared a short text about themselves, added it to the task cards or Padlet, and they added some pictures as well. They also added their favorite word in Spanish or German, and also answered the question, when I think about Germany or Spain, I think of ... So they could add something here. Again, I have an example for you. So for example, for the profile, they could finish this sentence, or for the favorite food or toys or hobbies, they could use this as a little support while writing that text. In this stage 3, they also have to read what the other pupils wrote about themselves, and answer some questions about the other students. And for this purpose, then they were put afterwards in groups so that they could answer these questions. This project, this telecollaboration project, is an ongoing project. So I'm actually talking about something that is still going on. It's a work in progress. The final stage, that This Is Us, the virtual exchange via a teleconference, will take place very soon. And again, here we have a preparation period where pupils write questions with teacher support for the partners, and teachers make sure to practice this in class so that once they meet online, the communication goes on smoothly. They will first communicate as a big group, and then they will get divided into smaller groups with direct partners, and they will continue the telecollaboration, teleconference part. So this is the description of the project that I wanted to tell you about. And now, as I said, my colleague, Professor Dr. Julien Kutem-Schmid, will continue with the part about the plurilingual aspects.
Okay, thank you, Anita. I'm going to share my screen now. So, yeah, if you could stop sharing your screen, and then I can. Yes. Okay. I can't share my screen, so if you could give me the permission. Okay, great. So share, and then I will start the presentation. Can you see my presentation? Yes, thank you. Okay, great. So I will continue. Let me change this a little bit. Yes. Okay. Good. So, as you have seen from the great example that we have provided here, telecollaboration is a complex activity requiring a great deal of planning and preparation. We started with an example of a successful telecollaboration because we want to inspire you and encourage you to carry out projects like this. And we gave an example from the primary school context in order to show that you can implement such projects even with pupils with low levels of language proficiency. And we have selected some of the most important questions that you need to ask yourself before embarking on such projects. These are the questions. Why am I doing this? What goals do I want to achieve with this telecollaboration? This is a key question that you should ask yourself. How can I integrate telecollaboration in the curriculum? What are the different phases of a telecollaboration project? How can I make my telecollaboration plurilingual? How can I find a reliable telecollaboration partner? I will now talk about each of these questions separately. The part on telecollaboration partner will be in the presentation. I don't know if I will manage to cover this in my short presentation. Okay. So what are the reasons for implementing a telecollaboration project? First of all, such exchanges can provide learners with authentic opportunities to use the target language. In the example we provided, both teachers could witness their students' excitement to create content in the target language. For instance, you have seen that they created videos, they created their profiles, etc. And why were they excited? Because they knew there was an audience interested in what they had to say. They were motivated to join the telecollaboration activities, not necessarily because they wanted to practice their English, but because they wanted to make friends and learn about another culture. So they learned English without even realizing it. And however, in the process of carrying out telecollaboration activities, they also developed soft skills, such as learning how to work in a team, how to solve conflicts. They also developed their critical digital competence as they created digital content. They learned how to interact in online environments. They solved technical problems, and they reflected on these processes. And of course, they also developed their intercultural competence. So these are the reasons why you should do telecollaboration. As we know, these are essential elements for educating future critical global citizens. So how can I integrate this telecollaboration project in the curriculum? This was a question that was frequently asked by the teachers we worked with. You know, teachers already have a lot of curricular content to cover in their everyday teaching. How can they then find time to implement a telecollaboration project? The only way is by integrating the telecollaboration project into regular language teaching activities. And how can you do that? Okay, so let me give you some tips. First of all, you need to negotiate a topic that is relevant for your curricular goals, to negotiate with your partner. We have seen how the teachers use the context of the school videos, for example, to introduce and practice school-related vocabulary, which is part of the language curriculum. And they use key sentence structures they had to cover anyway. We can see, for example, that in the case of the German learners, when they created their videos, they used the structure, "In this room, I can see," while the Spanish children used a different structure. "In this room, there are," because these were the structures they needed to learn in their specific context at that point in time. Second, you need to spend some time preparing your learners for the telecollaboration activities. This involves introducing and recycling vocabulary as well as sentence structures, but also providing learners with additional information about the context of the remote class. Country, city, the school. In our project, we have seen that this is extremely important, as it gives the learners a sense of safety, and it helps to spark their interest in the project. And this is all part of your language teaching. It's not an extra element, as long as you make sure these activities involve the use of the target language. Third, you need to exploit the materials and content created in the framework of the telecollaboration project to support your learners' language development. In this example of this project, we have seen how the teachers use authentic context created by the pupils, like the videos and the profiles, to create traditional listening comprehension and reading comprehension activities. The main added value is that the pupils are really interested in the content. Why? Because it's authentic content. And finally, it's important to include reflective phases in order to make sure the students are given the opportunity to reflect on their learning and make sense of all these experiences. If you decide to implement a telecollaboration project, what are the types of activities that you can carry out? There are three main types of tasks. In the example that Anita provided, most of the telecollaboration activities can be classified as information exchange tasks. So these are tasks that involve learners providing their telecollaboration partners with information about their personal biographies, local schools or towns or aspects of their home cultures. So most of the activities in this project focus on this type of exchange. However, you might remember that at some point, the learners were provided with guiding questions to compare and contrast their schools. This is an example of a comparison and analysis task. This type of task can be more demanding since it requires learners not only to exchange information, but also to go a step further and carry out comparisons or critical analysis of cultural products from both cultures, for example, books, films, and so on. And finally, you can also create the so-called collaborative tasks. This is more demanding, right? Especially in the primary school context. So these tasks require learners not only to exchange and compare information, but also to work together to produce a joint product or a conclusion. In the specific project we presented today, the teachers haven't implemented a collaborative task yet, but my colleague Hilal Shaheen will provide an example of a collaborative task that the teachers can implement. The last question I want to discuss is, how can I make my telecollaboration project plurilingual? This is a big topic in our project, template project. Here we are looking at how languages other than the target language can be included in the project. The recommendation in the literature is that in plurilingual telecollaboration, teachers should design tasks that require or allow the use of multiple languages and diverse cultural knowledge, create opportunities for learners' use of their plurilingual resources to engage in meaningful and personally relevant communication, and tasks that build on authentic plurilingual practice experienced by the learners in their everyday lives. In the project described here, English was the target language. So how were other languages included? There are some examples. When the teachers created their self-introduction videos, they used the target language English, but they also included some short phrases in their native languages so that they could provide a more accurate and comprehensive picture of themselves. By doing this, they show that they are plurilingual and they are proud of being plurilingual. Also, when the students created their videos, they included some words in their native languages or the school language. For instance, when the Spanish students described their flag, bandera, right? They used words in Spanish and Catalan. And why did they do that? First of all, there are some words in a language that are difficult to translate, and we usually use a paraphrase to explain them. And also this kind of multilingual interaction reflects the reality of how languages, how languages used in the real world, where multilingualism and code switching are common, right? Another example is the creation of the student profiles. They could include, for instance, their favorite word in a language other than English. This type of small change can give the students the possibility to include the school language, but also their heritage languages in their profiles. Again, this would help them to provide a more accurate and comprehensive idea of who they are and what they value, right? So it's not only about the target language, right? So basically, I want to conclude by saying that including a plurilingual component in your telecollaboration project isn't a very challenging task. It only involves making small changes to the telecollaboration tasks in order to allow learners to draw on all the linguistic resources they have at their disposal to communicate effectively. And now I hand it over to Hilal Shaheen, who will continue the presentation with a focus on intercultural competence.
Thank you, Yulene. Good afternoon, teachers. It's my pleasure today to talk to you about the cultural aspect of this project that has just been presented to you. I'll share my screen. Okay, you should all be able to see my screen now. So as you've just heard, intercultural competence is considered a key skill in today's societies, and it's a skill that can be developed through telecollaboration. But what exactly is culture? We in the template team understand culture as a set of shared meanings. That means the following. To say that two people belong to the same culture is to say that they interpret the world in roughly the same ways and can express themselves, their thoughts, and their feelings about the world in ways which will be understood each other. Now, as you can see in this quote, it says in roughly the same ways. So a set of shared meanings does not mean that every member of a particular culture interprets the world in exactly the same way as every other member does. So while there is some common ground, there is a shared meaning, culture is not homogeneous and stable. Instead, today, culture is viewed as a complex, changing construct. This applies to individuals as well, who can have multiple identities, which are fluid and open to change. Now, what does that mean for the classroom? An interesting question to ask here is, whose cultures are we actually teaching in class? One way to approach this question is by looking at textbooks, because they represent one of the many resources that teachers potentially use to teach their classes. So I want you to think about the following question. Whose cultures are included in your textbooks, specifically your foreign language textbooks, for example? If you want to, you can use the chat to type in your answers, and maybe we can compare later on in the interactive phase, but you don't need to. I just want you to really visualize your textbooks in your mind and then determine whether this matches what I'm about to talk about. In language teaching, culture is commonly still represented traditionally, so as a fixed homogeneous entity. It is considered to be made up of elements that are describable and that are unique to each culture, elements such as food or clothing, beliefs, and behavior. I have an example that illustrates this view of culture. You can see here a sample of textbook contents, and you can see that culture in this textbook is still viewed traditionally as a set of describable elements. In this case, we have values and beliefs, we have social and cultural life. And what you can also see is that these distinctions are made at national level. So the first part is dedicated to Great Britain, the next to the United States, and the other one to Canada. So in this case, culture and nation are treated as synonyms. The issue with such an essentialist approach to culture is that it ignores the diversity of culture within a nation, and it also leads to stereotypical depictions of culture, both of which can have a negative effect on intercultural communication, which is of course not what we want as teachers. But what does that mean for you? Does that mean that you have to avoid talking about nations with your students? Briefly put, the answer is of course no. It is legitimate for your students to be interested in learning about nation-based differences and features. They may actually have some prior knowledge, which may be of stereotypical nature. So it's important for you as teachers to actually address those. So teachers can definitely continue to teach and talk about national cultures. However, it is important for you to keep in mind that national culture is only one dimension that may or may not be relevant in a communication. In fact, other dimensions such as professions or genders can be more relevant than nation in a communication. So let us consider the group that we have here today. We have many different countries represented, and I assume you'll be interested in the national differences that you have in your specific context. But another dimension that I think will be relevant today is your profession. You are all teachers interested in learning about virtual exchanges. So later on in our interactive phase, it is this dimension, your profession as a teacher, that will be essential to your communication, because you will share your experiences and your knowledge as teachers, and not specifically as a teacher in Germany or as a teacher in Spain, although that of course may have an influence as well. For teachers, this also means that you should keep in mind that students have multiple identities, as I've mentioned earlier. So contemporary societies today are characterized by mobility, migration, digitalization. So cultures influence each other. They form new hybrid cultures, and boundaries become increasingly blurred and fluid. When a textbook does include representations of national culture, just as you have just seen in the sample that I've shown you, you as a teacher need to keep in mind that you convey to your students that each example is just that. It's one example and not the only valid representation of a culture. So a very simple example in that context, there are British people who do eat baked beans for breakfast, but that doesn't mean they all do it or that they all do it every single day. An essential distinction that helps to avoid a solely national focus on culture was proposed by Holiday. He speaks of large cultures and small cultures. According to him, large cultures are ethnic, national, and international entities, such as the British culture or the Western culture, whereas small cultures refer to any cohesive social grouping, which sounds more complex than it is. So it could, for example, be a family, it could be a classroom, it could also be a school. And we as well, the teachers that we have here today, we could consider ourselves a small culture. Holiday states that the small culture approach, as opposed to this large culture approach that many textbooks take, is more appropriate for a world which is increasingly multicultural at every level. When dealing with the topic culture in classrooms, reflection is an important aspect, as Dr. Kudrim-Schmid has just mentioned. This is true for virtual exchanges as well, in order to support the cultural learning of your students and make sure that they make the most of their experience. But when might this reflection take place, you might wonder? According to O'Dowd and Dooley, it is often in the classroom, in the related activities before and after the online interaction that intercultural learning takes place. So it's not necessarily when your students are interacting with the partner class, but it is in those in-between spaces that you have. So in those sessions where it's just you and your class, where intercultural learning really takes place. As you've heard from Anita earlier, the teachers in the virtual exchange between Spain and Germany did exactly that. They prepared and they supported their students not only linguistically by providing scaffolding, by creating those listening and reading activities, for example, they also supported students' cultural learning by creating a space where they could discuss the similarities and differences they've seen in those videos that they've created, by helping them write down questions for their partners. So to sum up, in a virtual exchange project, learning does not only take place in those instances when both classes are in contact, but also and especially in those in-between spaces where the teacher can actually create a space to process these new experiences that students make, where teachers can both offer linguistic support, think about language with students, as well as draw students' attention to certain cultural aspects of the exchange. For example, how the communication was, what challenges they may have faced, what was easier than they had anticipated, and so on. So the teacher's guidance in this reflective process is essential for virtual exchanges to be fruitful. So much for the theoretical aspect. Now I would like to connect this theory to the practice by using the virtual exchange project presented by Anita earlier, because this exchange project is a wonderful example of how the teachers managed to put this theory into actual classroom practice. One of the activities that was implemented in the virtual exchange is this one. You have seen it earlier. It's called This Is Me. The Spanish teacher in this case has prepared the worksheet to help students write about themselves. So this is a great example of scaffolding that many teachers actually do. And I want to draw your attention to two small parts of this worksheet. First, let's take a look at the section on food. You can see that the teacher asked students to name their favorite food, which is a great activity. Students can freely express their preferences, they're seen as individuals, they can bring in the diverse cultural repertoires. So in Germany, for example, we don't just have German students. I, for example, have a Turkish background, so I could actually implement that here as well. The students in this case could include the Spanish culture if it's relevant and meaningful to them. But of course, students may also choose a dish that has no cultural significance to them whatsoever. On top of that, you can see that the teacher asked students to name their favorite Spanish dish. This means that in this case, students are viewed as members of the national culture. And I'm sure students will enjoy this activity. They get to present their culture. They're often proud to do that. And the German kids can do the same thing in presenting their favorite German dish. Moreover, in this case, students have potentially expressed their interest to their teachers that they do want to learn about the different foods they have in Germany versus Spain. So of course, it makes sense to take students' interests into consideration. So what the teacher has managed here is to respect students as individuals with this first part where they speak about their favorite food in general, but the students also get to represent their national culture. However, there are some potential pitfalls that I would like to mention, specifically if teachers do not let students talk about their favorite food in general, as the teacher has done here, but instead automatically put students into one national category only. So all students get to talk about necessarily refers to this one dimension, the nation. The problem with that is that it may lead to overemphasizing the significance of national culture. It means that the diversity that exists within a national culture is neglected. So in this case, regional cuisines are lumped together into one big category, the Spanish cuisine. Of course, having one category of favorite Spanish food instead of naming the regional cuisines is not bad per se. Simplification is something that teachers engage in to make content more accessible. And in this case, the topic is not specifically food. Food is just a very small part of this activity called This Is Me. What I want to point out, though, is that teachers should be careful not to send the message to students that nations or national cultures are this fixed construct and that nation is the only relevant dimension in intercultural interaction and communication, because that's just not true. So to sum up, this means that teachers should reflect with students to avoid these pitfalls, maybe even use this activity that you can see here as a source of inspiration. So use a combination of both favorite food in general, in this case, this of course can be replaced with anything else, and then more specifically letting students talk about favorite Spanish or favorite German food, because in our experience so far, and I'm sure you as teachers will be able to agree, students are interested in learning about national cultures, but as we all know, students also enjoy talking about themselves as individuals. So the teachers in this case have managed to combine these two aspects beautifully. Another part that I would like to draw your attention to is the part that you can see here on the bottom. It's called When I Think of Germany. Again, the focus here is on the national level, which is fine. I just mentioned this is something students may be interested in. And as an example, in our virtual exchange we did last year, we had German children and Italian children in the first grade. And the German children were really interested in asking the Italian children if they eat pizza every day. This is what they thought of. These are young kids, 6 to 7 years old. They were really curious and they had a chance to ask these kids. And the kids in Italy said, yes, of course we eat pizza, but not every day. Why would you think that? So this gave them a chance to address those stereotypical notions that a lot of children have, which are not bad, but which can be addressed in a context like this. And this example shows that it's important to reflect with your students to avoid perpetuating these stereotypes. In this case, what the teachers could do, as you've heard, this is an ongoing project. So what they could do is exchange these lists containing what they think of Germany or Spain respectively. And then each class could look separately at those results and think about the following questions. Do we agree with what the other country thinks about us? What can we confirm and what can we deny? In this way, students are required to look at their own culture instead of just focusing on learning about other cultures, which is a thing that often happens in classrooms when the topic is cultural learning. So it's important to not only look at other countries, other cultures, but also to take a look at oneself, at one's own culture. Next, students could reflect on the individual level, of course. So what, if anything, applies to me personally? Which cultures am I a part of? And this reflection then would prepare students for the live session with the other class, which I will talk about in a second. So students can present themselves not only as members of the national culture, but also speak about the other cultures that they are members of, thus representing the cultural diversity instead of having this nation-based differentiation of Spanish class versus German class be the only relevant dimension in their interaction. Another key advantage of reflecting within the classroom is that the teacher can create a safe space where stereotypical thinking can be addressed. So instead of meeting the other class and having emotions run high, students potentially getting defensive and saying, why would you think that? Not all Germans are like this, or Spanish people don't do that. You have the teacher who can address these in a safe space with the students, and they can calmly think and discuss these things. So this is what the quote from O'Dowd and Dooley recommended earlier, to use those sessions before and after students are actually in contact with the partner class to support their cultural learning. The final activity I want to draw your attention to is the meeting that is happening online called This Is Us. So the great thing about this is that students get to know each other on a personal level as well. So they're not just meeting the Spanish class as a whole group, but they also get to meet individuals with a name, with preferences. So they get to interact on a more personal basis. As Yulene mentioned earlier, collaboration is an essential aspect of virtual exchanges. And an activity that is appropriate in this context would be the creation of a Venn diagram. You can see an example of such a Venn diagram here from an exchange between Germany and New Zealand. This activity combines those two stages mentioned by Yulene earlier. So we have the comparison and contrast and the collaborative activity all in one. So you can see the circle on the left, what I have, what I like. Then we have the circle on the right, what my partner has and what my partner likes. And then this overlap in the middle, what we both have and what we both like. So students get to compare their preferences. They understand that differences may be related to their cultural context. So holidays that are celebrated may depend on that. The songs they sing may depend on that. But they also learn that despite these differences, they may have many similarities. And in fact, they may have more in similar with a child living miles and miles away than they have in common with teenagers or adults living in the same country as they do. So this Venn diagram is a potential collaborative activity that you can do in virtual exchanges with students. Now, to wrap this whole thing up, I want to finish this input phase of the webinar with another quote. You don't have to read the whole thing. The main part is highlighted. Intercultural learning is a lifelong process. And I chose this quote to take some of the pressure off of teachers who decide to try out virtual exchanges, because virtual exchanges can be very challenging for teachers as well, who have to organize this whole thing, who have to find a partner class, who have to structure the whole project with another teacher whom they have never met. So these are some tips that we have collected based on the experience we have so far, to not place too high expectations on yourself or your class, to allow yourself to grow together with your students, and to, of course, make sure to enjoy the experience. Now, if we have managed to spark your interest in engaging in a virtual project yourself, you will find some tips on how to find telecollaboration partners in our presentation that will be available on Moodle. With that, I end the input phase of our webinar, and I thank you very much for your attention.